In today's show, we're going to talk about PowerApps AddColumns, ShowColumns, drop columns, rename columns, maybe even sort by columns. I don't know. Some of those different functions that you use when you're working with a data source where you don't control it, right? It's real easy to build an app if you control the data source, but when you don't control the data source, sometimes you have to manipulate the data within your app. And so that's what this video is going to be about. But first, here's our intro. Hi, my name is Shane Young with PowerApps 911. Those guys. In today's show, we're going to get into the different column functions, right? So there's add columns, there's show columns, there's rename columns, there's drop columns, there is sort by columns. Who knows? Maybe we'll even find some more along the way. But where these come into handy is in some of the apps I've been building recently, like for example, using Dynamics as a data source. I don't control Dynamics, right? I can't get in there and manipulate the columns or the way I'm storing the data. So I have to take whatever they give me and I need to manipulate that and put it together to build out the solution the customer wants. And in this case, because of the way Dynamics is structured, they have like 12 different tables that I'm pulling in. So in this video, we're going to kind of take a step back. We're going to use some simple SharePoint list, but we're going to make sure that fundamentally you know how to use these very important functions that they don't come up all the time, but man, when they do, they can really save the day. So hopefully you'll enjoy this. So let's just switch over to my desktop, take a look at kind of what we're going to build. And so over here on my desktop, I've got a couple quick examples of what we're going to talk about here. And so the first one is an example of using show columns. So for example, my drop-down list here, right, just has first names entered, right? So I've put everybody's first names in here, but when you choose a first name, so if you choose Snoopy, then you want to be able to see Snoopy's first name and last name. So it turns out that if you just do a drop down the way you've always done drop downs, you can't do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use show columns to manipulate how this drop down is pulling back and storing data so that we can leverage all of that data later. Okay? So that one's pretty straightforward. And I use show columns in almost every app I build. So that one's a pretty common function. Over here on screen 2, this one I've done a little bit crazier. Okay? And so this is back to that Dynamics example where I needed to manipulate data. So in my SharePoint list, I've got first name and last name and department, right? So let's go over here to SharePoint right here, right? So first name, last name, and department. In my departments list, I have the IT manager, right? So for accounting, it's accounting Amy. So in my app, what I wanted to do, that's not my app's over here. Over here in my app, what I wanted to do was I wanted to have a gallery not only concatenate the name for Nicole, right? So first name and last name, but then also go and get her department manager. So that way I could pull from different data sources and still just have one gallery showing all the information. So to do that, we're going to use a function called AddColumns. And so we're going to talk about that. I'm going to use that about 4 or 5 different ways because there's a lot of confusion around that one. There's also things we'll talk about a little bit later, like rename and drop. I don't really ever use those. Shh. So we'll kind of mention where they might be used, but in reality, we don't. So got it? All right. Then let's set out about building, rebuilding this same functionality, right? Because I hate showing you guys pre-baked stuff. So let's go over here. We'll say new screen. I mean, and who doesn't love these beautiful blank white screens that I do? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say insert. I'm going to insert a control. I'm going to insert a drop down. Now on the previous screen, I had a gallery, but that was just to show you the data. For this example, we don't need that, so I'm not going to do that. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid of the drop-down sample. And I'm going to first start out and kind of do what you guys probably most traditionally do, right? So you'd say, all right, I want to show my employees list, and I want to show the first name column, right? So go down here, boom. And if I did a good job of that, PowerApps is going to be a meanie pants, so do it again, boom. So then, right, so I hold down the Alt key, hit the little button. So there are the different first names. So that's pretty normal. So then if we throw a label down here, right, what we're going to do, we'll just say name is, and then what? We do a concatenate and we would say, well, we want drop down 2, right? That's the name of our drop down. So drop down 2 dot selected dot. So there's first name and there's value, which is first name. So both of those are the same data, but there's a last name column, right? But if I do last name, I can't reference it. It's an invalid character. All right, let's put first name in there for a minute then. So we'll put first name in there just to show that works. All right, so name is Nicola. That's working. Cool. So in order to get this, what some people will do is they'll then turn around and do a lookup, right? There's a lot of different ways they do it. But for me, that becomes very confusing and convoluted because I don't want my label to have lookups and all these extra functions if I can avoid it. So instead, what I'll do is I'll go here to my dropdown, and we're going to go over to the beginning. We're going to say, I want to use the ShowColumns function. So we're going to say, I want to ShowColumns employees. I'm not going to do this whole dot first name thing anymore. Get rid of that. I'm going to do a comma. What column do I want to show? Well, the first one I want to show is first name, right? Because that's what we need in our dropdown. So there's first name. Notice that they use quotes around it, so you'll need that. And then I'm going to say, all right, well, I also want to do last name. So there's last name. And, maybe just for giggles, we'll return, what was it? I think it's good at their job is the other one. Yep, so there's that one, right? So I can return as many columns as I want. And I do this a lot. So for example, my Dynamics customer, right? I'm returning the work order number that they want to show, but then I'm also returning the additional columns for item name, item group, project number. Like I have like 7 columns I have to return because I need all that information later and I need it all correlated to what they did here in this dropdown. So I'm going to do this. And so then now you can see my name is Nicola, right? So the same, just as before, we have the same items in here because ShowColumns used with the dropdown is just going to show you whatever the first valid column is here. So that's first name. So looks exactly the same to the user. But over here now, what we can do is we can say, hey, and a little space between the names and drop down to dot selected dot. Look at that. There's first name, there's last name, there's good at their job. So all the fields that we returned from in the show columns are now available to us. So now we can build out that label that you wanted, which is, they chose the first name, or in the case of the customer, they chose the work order, but then I had all the additional project details and I could just do it in this syntax because it was tied back to that. So show columns, that comes up a lot. Most of my apps these days are built using SQL as my storage, right? So I've kind of got relational data or relational tables, right? So a projects table and a customers table and a contacts table and an employee table, right? And so I'm using like IDs. So, keep in mind, I often would also have returned right here, with my SharePoint data source, with my SQL data source, right? There's an ID column. And that's what I really want to tie it to, right? Because first names or last names especially, right? If I get married, my last name can change, maybe. But you know what I mean? The first name, last name, whether or not they're good at their job, that type of stuff may change. But the ID, right, it's records number 7 in my database, that doesn't change. So we try to store things like 7, the ID of the column, so we can reference it back. And even if they update the data, we're okay. So, okay? So that's show columns, and that's a really important one to me. So hopefully that one helps you guys, because I feel like that, like I mentioned, is almost in every app I did. All right, so let's make another new screen. And so let's talk about add columns, because this one does not work the way that in my head and the documentation kind of implies that you would think it would work, right? So if you look at the add columns, right, the way I read it was you go in here and you say, all right, I want to add columns. And I'm going to go to employees. So that'll add, so what that says is, all right, so add columns to my data source employees. So, all right, I want to add a new column. And one of the things you do is just make it up. So you can just say my demo column. And then the second part is the expression. So I did this, right? Very complicated solution here I'm building. I know these are exact things you guys do. Right, so in my head, this is what I would do. I'd say, all right, on select this button, add columns to employees. So I'm gonna hit the Alt key, I'm gonna press the button, I'm gonna press it like 7 times. And so then I'm gonna say, all right, give me a gallery now, vertical. And so here I wanna see employees. There they are. But so instead of the title, I wanna see that new column we just made up. And so I forget even what I named it because I'm silly. My demo column. I call it something different every time. So go back over here. So edit. And so we'll hit the drop down. And if you look through this list, I'm not going to go through the list line by line because I know it's not there. There is no my demo column there. Because add columns does not change your data source. It takes your data source and it makes available within the context of that an additional column. And you're like, huh? So instead of trying to explain what that really means, go over here, grab this, because this is correct syntax. Copy this, paste it, or whatever, get it. Go over here, SharePoint, or your gallery, right? So gallery 3. So for items, instead of that, we're going to paste in add columns, employees, my demo column. I bet you the light bulb came on. So now if we go right here and say, hey, instead of title, we want to use my demo column. There it is. Woohoo! I did this. No? Okay. So, but this is what's important to understand about add columns, is it just does it in the context of where you're using it. So in the case of me wanting to use it with the gallery, I just put it in the items property of the gallery, and so this makes it available. Now, you might not find yourself doing something like this to say, oh, my demo column, right, I did this. That's kind of silly. But for example, my data source does not have the full name. So what I might do here is I might make a column called full name. And then what you can do is all of the other columns in the collection are available. So I could say, all right, I want to do first name, right? Because that's one of the columns in my employees thing. I want to take first name. I want to add to that my good old space, and, right, just like that. And last name. So I can do a calculated column, right? So here I'm going to do some calculated text. So if we go here and click on, if I can click there we go. So then now if we do full name, we now have first name and last name, right? So this is, right, first name and last name were in my SharePoint list, right? Back over here, employees. Just to remind you, so first name and last name, but there wasn't a full name column. So we invented, that is still not the right place to go. We invented a new column called full name on the fly. So that's a pretty handy little trick to add to your bag when you can't control the data source. So in this example, I wanted to bring that together. Maybe that's not really what you wanted to do. What you could do, you can also have additional ones. So maybe we're going to have one for dog years. Okay. And so then what we're going to say for dog years is I believe there is a age column. There is. So we're going to say age times 7, right? And if you're not familiar with that, it's generally believed that dog years times 7, you know, kind of gives you the human year equivalent. But so then now that would calculate that on the fly. So then we can say that Nicola will go here to dog years. And so, oh, she is 203 in dog years. Don't tell her I told you that. She'd be mad at me. Right? Good old Chewy's only 14, I think. Where are you at, Chewy? Make it bigger. Yep, so Chewy's 14. But so that is something that we'll do, is we'll calculate data, because we don't want to calculate later, right? I could just have easily have done the math right here, but sometimes, especially in, like I said, that Dynamics customer example, for me, it's been a lot easier to build columns on the fly using add column. And the column that I used for them, I wanted you guys to see a look at this. So the last column, I promise we'll stop doing this, is, I remember there's this good at their job, yes or no. Okay? And I think that actually returns to true and false. So if we go over here, let's check what that returns to real quick. Go over here and we'll say good at their job. So that is a true or false field, right? So in my calculation, this is what I had to do for the customer, is they wanted to have different options show up based on what that value was, right? So we were storing this really long string in the database. And so if that string started with a certain number, then we marked it as, you know, happy time. And if the string started with a different number, we marked it as sad time. That's not actually a true story, but you get the impression. I mean, it's true that I did this for them, but they didn't call it happy and sad time. Anyway, so what I did though is I said, you know, we're going to make a column here. We'll say needs training. And so what I want you to see is I put in a if. And so I said, if good at their job, right? So if that turns out to be true, then we're going to say needs training, and we're going to say no. And if that turns out to be false, we did yes. Okay, so if they're good at their job, then they don't need training. If they do, then they do, or they don't. So then we're going to go over here, and so then you do needs training. All right, so no, 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 no. Apparently everybody's good at their job at our company. Let's make sure that's true in the SharePoint list. Yep, everyone was good at their job. So that's why it showed up that way. But that's the concept I wanted you to understand was I can do ifs and other types of formulas in here to make a better experience. Speaking of formulas, fine. Last one I'm going to do. I told you I was going to stop, but I just can't. This is too much fun. And really the reason I kind of am hounding on this is because there's so many different ways that I end up having to use this. I just want you to understand them. So department manager. Let's make this a little bigger so you can actually read it. So department manager is not stored in this list. In this list is stored department. So what I did is I said, all right, I need to do a lookup from the departments list. And what I want is I want to get where the title in the department list is equal to the department that the person works in. And when that happens, I want the manager. So we'll let this render, and then I will show you right here. So let's go into here. So we're going to say department manager now. So accounting Amy. Okay, so the way that works, right? We'll show you the data, and then we'll go look at the formula again. So Nicola is in the accounting department. If we look at the departments list, we'll see that the title of accounting, the manager for that is accounting Amy. So our formula was department manager, right? There's a lookup in the departments list where title equals department and manager. And it's doing it for everyone, right? So Nicola was accounting Amy. Chewy is executive Ella. I mean, I got really creative there in my alliteration, I know. But these are all ways that you can build your data set. Now, the last thing I want to show you about add columns, I'm not going to do any more columns, I promise. I'm cut off, no more columns. If you want to store this, so here I'm showing you an example of using this inline with a gallery, or you could use this inline with a drop down. It's the other place I use these inline. But if you want to store this, I'm going to highlight all this. I'm going to copy it. Remember our button? Let's go back to our button. Let's talk about how I would have done this. What you want to do is you want to do a collection. And so if you haven't used collections before, there's a link below to the collections video. But I'm going to make a collection called, temp collection, and then paste in that exact formula, because I know that formula works. So then now, when I press the button, it is going to go and do all of those lookups, all of that work, but put it into one collection that we can then now use throughout our app. So if things like, you're going to have to reuse this fixed up data a whole bunch, you want to have it in different places, you're going to come back and forth, but the data is not going to be changing, put it in a collection. So that way your app only looks it up one time. And then in my gallery, right, for items, now what are we going to do? Instead of using that, we're going to use my temp collection. Like that. And then all the data is still there, right? Because all those same columns are in place. It's like nothing, didn't skip a beat. So that's one of those performance tricks also that we're having to kind of work with customers a lot now, is figuring out when it makes sense to put the data in a collection so we don't overfetch the data. We don't go keep getting the same data over and over and over again. We don't want to do that. If we have to get the data more than once, let's put it in a collection and use that collection, as long as we don't have to worry about the data changing, over the course of one of the users using the app. Okay. So there's a couple other columns I promised to show you that I don't really want to show you, but I will. Let's go back over here to screen 3 real quick. So one of the things is it drives me crazy that this list, right, where we did show columns, is not in order. So what you could do is you go over here and you say sort by columns, and then what column do I want to sort by? I want to sort by first name because that's the one I want to use. So that'll go boom. So then now these are in alphabetical order. So that's sort by columns. Also keep in mind you can combine these. So for example, if you wanted to add columns here and then show columns, there's nothing stopping you from doing that, right? So if we go back over here real quick and we grab our fancy add columns code that we know works, and I always do this stuff where I know it works, so that way when I go and make it more complex, I know that this portion of the code is not the problem. So go back over here, and I could say, all right, so instead of employees, right, because ShowColumns needs a data source. Well, the data source I'm going to give it is AddColumns. But now, right, I'll pull this down so you can see it, right? So let's do the format by text thing. Oh, fancy. So what are we doing? We are sorting by columns, but before we're sorting by columns, we're showing columns, but before we show columns, we're adding columns. So I added this data source, and then I'm going to show the columns first name, last name, good at their job. Maybe though we now say, hey, you know what else I want to do? I'm going to hit Shift Enter. I also want to show dog ears. Just like that. So now we're showing that, or we're showing that column because that'll make it available with the drop down, and then we're doing our sort. So then if we get rid of that, so now we can come over here and say, my name is Chewy, and I didn't plan this, but this is working out well. And I am this many years old, like this. And then we'll do an ampersand, and then we'll do a drop down to dot selected dot be there. There it is. There's our dog ears. Boom. Look at that. Chewy is now, I'll make him bigger. Name is Chewy Young, and I am this many years old, 14. So it's not formatted very well, but you get the idea. I pulled a whole bunch of data together in one fell swoop in order to build the solution I wanted. Because a lot of times if I had to do this, right, and I was in charge of the SQL or the SharePoint data source, I just go do it in SharePoint or SQL and it'd be done. I just pull the data over. But sometimes I can't change the data source. So this is how I change the data source on the fly. There's another function called rename columns. So if you wanted to rename a column that was coming out of your data source to something else, you could. I have never actually used that function. I almost had to use it once, but I realized I was using it because I'd done something else stupid. So I just stopped doing the stupid things. I didn't need that column or that function anymore, but that's available. Drop columns is if for whatever reason you're getting a bunch of columns from your data source and you want to drop that down to only, you want to drop a couple columns. You don't want to get all the columns. You only want to get 3 columns of the 7 back. You could use drop columns. I scratched my head on that one. I've never even pretended to know reason why I would use that one. And then the last thing I want to kind of throw out to you here was with add columns. If you want to add columns and then have like the add columns reference each other, then you have to stack add columns on top of add columns. And then you might as well be looking at the matrix at that point. I've never had to do that either, but someone on Twitter mentioned it. So I thought I would kind of give him a shout out and say that, I think it was Theo. I hope I got the name right. But they mentioned that on Twitter. That was kind of one of those things you needed to do. So. All right. And I think Brian was another one. Brian mentioned, I wanted to make sure I talked to you about the button thing. So Brian and I were on the same page there. So I think that sums up the columns. These are important tasks. All right, you might not need this today, but this is the stuff we put in our tool belt so you have it when it does show up. Other than that, I guess we'll just do a quick little catch up, right? So I apologize. It's been a long time since I've made a video. It's been a few weeks. I was out of town for travel. And things here at PowerApps 911 are exploding. We're hiring people and we've got more work than I can do. I should be working on a customer's app right now. Sorry, customer. But I want to get this video out there. We also just announced a training class. So if you'd like to take some PowerApps training with this guy, then that is coming up November 12th. Go to powerappsnine11.com/training. Get all the details about the class. It is an online class. Should be a lot of fun. We're going to kind of get into the nitty gritty and really talk about how I build apps. And the class is targeted at people who've built apps before, but aren't really sure they know what they're doing all the time. That's kind of my target audience for that class. So go check that out. It'll be a lot of fun. If you mention YouTube, we'll get you a nice little discount. I forget the number that I came up with. So mention YouTube and get a really good discount, but I forget what it was. All right. That's all I got. If you got any thoughts, leave me comments below, ideas for future videos, ask questions. I get literally about a dozen questions a day and I answer every single one of them. Maybe not always right, maybe not always with the answer they wanted, but I answer a lot of questions. So happy to do that for you too. All right. Well, thanks and have a great day. Hey, it's me again. If you got a second, click the subscribe button. That always keeps me making more videos. Or if you want to work together, need some help getting your Power Apps going, hit me up at PowerApps 911. Always happy to work together. Or finally, if you're really just looking for more videos, that's probably what it is, check out the Power Apps playlist over here and enjoy that. All right, thanks and have a great day.